Hello. Housing is at the top hierarchy of man's needs. If you want a man to function properly, give him a decent roof over his head. And if you want to jumpstart any economy at all, give the housing subsector a boost, because it's a value chain that keeps adding and adding and adding. The Nigerian situation is quite interesting because we have a huge housing deficit. Depending on who you're speaking with, is between 15 to 20 million houses in deficit, and so the need for housing continues to increase. Some people are landlords, we have landlords, but a whole lot of us are tenants. What that means is that we pay a fee called the rent to the landlord in order to enjoy accommodation. Now, talking about rent, what should motivate a landlord to increase his rent? What are the modalities? What percentage should he apply even if he wants to increase his rent? And is the tenant carried along? These are more we'll be looking at today, because our focus today is on indiscriminate increase in house rent. It is Weekend Deal, coming to you from the network service of the NTA. My name is Patience Eloyi Abba. I am delighted you've joined us today. We would love to hear from you. I am also delighted that Thelma is sitting here. Thelma?
As amazing as always, Patience. Fantastic time to be together because we're addressing Nigeria's needs. We're going to hit the ground running with this one, but it concerns everyone. Even if you're a landlord today, at some time in your life, some point, you were also renting from somebody. So that means you're upgrading, perhaps you're upskilled as well. So some will say, why not give the tenant an opportunity to also pay you and also put something aside to get their own accommodation so that they too can become landlords and landladies. But we always know that there are two sides to every story. It's the tenants who are crying out. Do the landlords have a say? What's happening with them? Tenants are crying about indiscriminate increase in rentals. There's no forewarning. You just think about it and you come and increase it. So we are bringing that to the fore today. And a wise man once said that the service we pay for being on this earth enables us to own a house. We are all determined to own. Would the landlords and landladies allow us to do so? My name is Thelma Obaze. Welcome. It's Weekend Deal. Yes, it's Weekend Deal, and we reach you every weekend. We bring to the fore topical issues as they affect and impact Nigerians, not just here in Nigeria, but all over the world, with a view to making progressive change where required. Just like today, when we talk about indiscriminate increase in house rent. Now, we say that service is the rent we pay to have property. May a land, even now, people find it hard, even those who are working, to keep up with the annual rent, such that many landlords and landladies now collect rent every month. It never used to be the case. But Semben has delved deep, and he's talking about the housing future for Nigeria. Where does it lie? Semben, please take it from here.
I have had friends complaining. In fact, two very close friends. One of them had her rent increased from 1 million naira for 2 bedrooms here in the Federal Capital Territory to 2.5 million. So from 1 million she used to pay to 2.5 million. How do you reconcile that? When you have about 150% increase, or almost 200% increase in the rentage. So how do you expect that person to cope?
House owners indiscriminately increasing rent has become a pressing issue in Nigeria, affecting millions of citizens and exacerbating the challenges of affordable housing. In the fight for affordable housing, there are passionate advocates striving to make a difference. Organizations such as Affordable Housing Advocates of Nigeria and Nigeria Tenants' Rights Movement have been actively working to raise awareness and push for policies that protect tenants from arbitrary rent hikes.
Some landlords are taking too much advantage of the situation. Instead of reasonable increments, since there is an economic change in the price of things and lifestyle, so definitely we all Nigerians expect increment on rent, but not as high as 50% or 40%. In short, even 30%, 20% in the present economy is already high.
Several lawmakers in Nigeria have also recognized the urgency of addressing the rent crisis and are passionate in their legislative duties towards curbing indiscriminate rent increases. Notably, Senator Aisha Dahiru Ahmed introduced a bill seeking to regulate rent and provide a legal framework for tenancy agreements. This move presents a significant step towards protecting tenants and ensuring fair practices in the rental market.
We have laws regulating relationship between landlords and tenants. However, I don't think there is a law stating clearly how much a landlord can charge for rent. This is very difficult because it's an interplay of market forces. People borrow money from banks to build houses for rent. Now, if you fix a specific amount, that this is what you must charge as rent, it will be very, very difficult to get people to build houses because depending on the amount you fix, it may not be adequate to encourage investment in that sector.
I believe we need to revisit the Rent Law Act of Nigeria because we have Rent Law of Nigeria in existence. We even have the amendment in 2021 that was effected in 2021. So with all that on ground, the implementation is what is very poor.
Experts in urban development and housing economics emphasize the importance of a comprehensive approach to solving the rent crisis. Some believe strategies such as increasing investment in social housing projects, providing incentives for private developers to build affordable housing units, and improving the overall housing infrastructure can make a huge impact.
Look at Abuja, a very big city. A lot of houses have been built of various categories, but most of the houses are beyond the limit or are beyond what ordinary civil servants can afford. You can see a lot of estates with hundreds or thousands of buildings, houses built without anybody occupying them. Not that people don't want those houses, but they simply cannot afford those houses because their prices are prohibitive.
I can tell you, since I came to Abuja, I've seen a lot of structures, very many structures abandoned and all of that. These kind of structures should be put more adequately in place for civil servants to be given units there.
By showcasing the initiatives of advocates, legislative actions, and expert insights, there is a need for comprehensive solutions to secure a more suitable and equitable future for Nigeria's housing and rent control.
Because of the influx of people into the major cities, housing continues to be a challenge. The rural-urban migration syndrome, it continues, and the cities continue to grow and expand. Are there houses enough to cater to everyone? Lagos Network Center will come into this conversation now.
The need for adequate and decent housing is part of the central focus and an integral component in national strategies for growth and poverty reduction. Decent and affordable housing is one of the basic needs of individuals, families, and the community at large. Lagos State, a city with rapid urbanization and population growth, has become a magnet for people seeking economic opportunities, leading to influx of migrants from other regions. This has thereby led to exorbitant accommodation charges, and increase in renting a decent house has become the order of the day.
Urbanization, as we know, it has its advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are more because of technological advancements and the fact that housing should actually be for all. But when you have overpopulation in a community, of course we know that we have the natural resources that would be depleted, and that would in fact infer into what we get in housing, because what we have is overpopulation and very little houses to be occupied.
The constant population surge outpaces the rate at which new housing units are being built, worsening the gap between supply and demand in the housing sector.
The demand for housing on the mainland is extremely high because, of course, the houses are cheaper, but the population on the mainland is about 4 times the population you get on the island. So there is so much, there are so many people seeking rents and housing, much more. So the demand, of course, will be higher on the mainland, while the supply of those houses will be fewer.
Government at various levels have introduced numerous housing schemes that is geared towards supplying affordable housing while trying to bridge the housing deficit gap. However, majority of this housing scheme are still beyond the reach of the working class in terms of affordability.
When you are building, you will learn one new thing, and that new lesson is every kobo counts. So it enhances your discipline, and even the monies you used to spend frivolously, you find out you can no longer afford it. So you realize that all your resources are channeled towards that objective of developing your own property.
Accessing homes may be very tough, may be very high for individual. But when we collaborate, 2 people can buy a house. 2 families can buy a land and then divide the land. On a half plot of land, you can build a bungalow. And the 2 of you can buy a whole plot and then divide it. The another thing is to also use the opportunity of people that are doing installment payment for landed properties and so on like that.
A concerted effort by the government, private sector, and communities to prioritize the need of all residents and work towards creating more equitable and sustainable urban environment for people to live in is a desire many urban dwellers yearn for.
The government should come in, the government should step in at all levels. There should be free housing. There should be council flats. There should be houses that could be given under mortgage. I don't know if our Federal Mortgage Bank is still functioning very well, because I know it's there. So there should be an avenue where people can access funds easily.
A hope of many generations yet unborn.
Let's meet our guest, Henry Leonard Esquire, is a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators of the United Kingdom. Let's get to meet him.
Okay, so our second guest is a very beautiful lady, an expert in the real estate sector who has indeed done so well. Let's meet her.
Indeed, our interesting discourse is going to start to unfold now because we have our experts in the house. Why do we pay rent almost all our lives and are still unable to get our own houses? Are the landlords really arbitrarily increasing rent? I will start with Dr. Ibukun because I want her to tell us. She's in that field. What is happening? Those who rent are saying that rent is being arbitrarily increased. Does the landlord have that right, or is this not a statement of fact? Tell us.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, the bigger problem is the definition of arbitrary, right? So generally, we do not live in a rent-controlled environment, and then it means that the landlord can increase rents. Now, the question is, when does it become arbitrary? It's usually in terms of how frequently, the notice for increase, and then lastly, the quantum. Right. As a rule of thumb, is usually agreed or is assumed that when rent increases is above 50% of the current rate, it is assumed to be arbitrary.
When it's above 50%?
50% of the current rate.
So 30% is not arbitrary?
So, well, that's the rule of thumb. However, the question then is this increase coming after 10 years of the rent being at a flat rate? Because what then happens is that the landlord wakes up and says, oh, the value of my property relative to 5 years ago, 10 years ago has increased. A very easy way to assume what I'm paying on rent, is it fair, is that the rental yield, which is what percentage of the value of your house are you supposed to be paying your rent, of the house you're staying in, are you supposed to be paying your rent, is usually between 5 and 8%. Which means if I'm staying in a 3-bedroom apartment and the value of 3-bedroom apartments where I'm living is about 50 million naira, and that's easy to find, right? What you then ask is my rent between 5 and 8%? If I'm staying in a 50 million naira worth house, right, and I'm paying about 2.5 million, that's about 5%. That seems decent. So between 5 and 8%, if you're in that band, you get a sense for, oh, it's decent. Now, where the worry then comes from is that our inflation rate affects the value of our homes.
Indeed.
So we are running about 27.3% inflation rates now, which means the landlord's house is also likely to have increased in that value about that time. And the man assesses and says, oh, the value of my property has increased, and so my rental yield is expected to increase. So again, however, the good thing is we have some form of protection. We expect the landlord to give notice. Some people say 6 months, some people say 3 months. It's not defined, but it has to be agreed. The rent is an agreement. The rent tenancy landlord relationship is an agreement. So they need to also agree on rental increases. When the man comes and says, or the woman comes and says, I'm increasing my rent, he needs to seek your consent. When that consent is sought, then if you do not agree and you believe it is arbitrary, there's also a right to go to court. And the court determines whether this is arbitrary or not.
Amazing.
Okay, interesting, because my thing is about modalities. You've said everything, and I'm going to ask Dr. Barrister Henry. Okay, so in a situation... Okay, doctor, yeah, it's coming, doctors, yeah, it's coming. So what happens when a landlord ignores all the modalities you just mentioned and just tells you, I'm increasing my rent? What can I do as a tenant?
Okay, first of all, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, is when it comes to a landlord and a tenant, it's simply an agreement. Yeah, so the best way you go about it is you put it in your agreement before you go into the contract. And that's what we call the rent review clause in an agreement. This is one thing that most of the people overlook. Some people don't even get their agreement signed. They don't even see the agreement
We
before
don't
they
even
move into
see
the
it,
house.
yes, yes.
And you know, you get busy and you forget about all this. And when the landlord starts increasing rent, that's when it occurs to you that I did not sign any agreement. At that point, the landlord may show you an agreement to say, oh, this is a standard in which I operate. My rent review is, let's say, 20% every 2 years. And because you did not sign this, this is his house. This is his agreement. This is the standard at which he rents his house. You can't begin to challenge that. But nonetheless, like my friend said here, if it is arbitrarily increased, which makes it unfair, you can approach the court as well.
Okay.
Yes, but mainly is that make sure it is in your rent review clause.
Okay.
Because it's just a simple contract and it is guided by the agreement of parties. When it is, I don't see you, it's not always that you will win that in court.
Yes, true.
Because at the end, if
How
you
many
begin to
tenants
challenge,
even go to
yes,
court?
if you begin to challenge your landlord, the best option left to you is
To park out.
Park
Park
out.
out.
Park out of the house.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that's really the problem.
Thank you, Barrister. Dr. Ibukun, why I use the terminology arbitrary is because we've been hearing a myriad of stories.
Yes.
From the FCT, from Edo State, from Delta. Recently, we got some gist from Port Harcourt, where you will come to see that feature where someone was saying that if your landlord passes by your house and perceives chicken being fried or sees people bringing in a bag of rice, he's going to just come in a week and do that. It's either that is arbitrary or it coincides with the tenancy or the rent review clause in the agreement which the tenant never read. So what we're looking at now, is there something among landlords, owners of property, is there a time they come together to talk about the best interest of their tenants? Because at some point, we are of the opinion that sentiments ought to come to the fore. Yes, there's inflation, but where does it leave the tenant as well? The landlord wants more money, but are you going to get money out of stones?
So, excellent. Unfortunately, it's in terms of emotions, it may be a difficult play. We also do not have structured, so we don't have structured controls around landlord associations, tenant associations, and all of that. So everybody just does their own thing. But he said, Barrister said one very important thing, the rent review clause. I have had people who also say that their rent review clauses are also benchmarked to. So you have people saying, oh, it will be increased at this particular rate every year or every 2 years. The other option that I see people are beginning to explore now is to say that it's benchmarked to an average of 3 or 4 similar properties on the same
location.
street. So you then find that, you know, okay, for every 2 years, we would review the rents where we benchmark to an average of 3 to 4 similar properties on. In fact, sometimes they go as far as saying from numbers 1 to 10 on this road, probably the similar types of units, right? So again, the protection can only lie because we don't live in a rent control environment. That is, we're not in an environment where the government says from here, you can't charge more than this amount. The only way to protect yourself as a tenant is to insist that we're going to have a rent review clause, and this is what guides it. That also helps planning, so you're not in for surprises. Because if you know my rent is going to increase by 10% next year, then you're planning for it. Right, you prepare for it. The other thing again is to really look at the fact that, do we have a demand-supply gap? I do not think that we do, because there's so many, in a place like Abuja, there are many houses that are still unoccupied because the landlord is asking for an arm and a leg, right? So the new wave of saying that, or if we have properties that are empty, people need to either start paying charges or COs will be withdrawn and stuff like that. I mean, there needs to be deterrence. If we have all the properties coming to the market, then we have more supply, which means that demand then can begin to have some power. There's some buyer power.
Interesting. Okay, let me talk about rent to own. It's been a thing that I've been interested in. I mean, it works in other climes where as you're paying your rent, it adds to you buying the property. Why is it not working here? The rent to own initiative, why are landlords not exploring? Or developers, I think you are a developer, so let me come to you for that. Rent to own.
Okay. So first off, coming from the developer angle, because we do not have long-term financing, it's a bit difficult to get long-term financing. From the developer angle, it may be difficult for him to be the one that would say, okay, pay me for this house over a period of 20 years in which your rent then becomes part of your payments for the house. But the interesting thing is we are beginning to see a bit of traction in that regard with respect to the Federal Mortgage Bank and now has a rent-to-own scheme. The only thing is it only applies to properties for which they have investments. So that is becoming a thing, and we need more government support in that space so that developers can then build and long-term monies are available for people to pay over a period. It works similarly to a mortgage, right? So what you find is that as our mortgage industry begins to gain traction, rent-to-own will follow suit, right? But then it has to be a blend of government support along with the developers for long-term financing, because the success of rent-to-own lies in long-term financing.
Barrister Leonard, many of those who, when tenants hear of court, they usually, they just give in. Please, that's where I know I will lose. Because most of the time, they are unable, they don't have the financial capacity for any tussle in any law court to be coming and going. So in the end, they succumb to whatever the landlord is saying. But before that, now, most of us don't read that tenancy agreement. We just take it, if need to even sign, put it inside the drawer, and that ends it. Ought we to involve a lawyer right from the minute we move into a house? Is there a place for a lawyer there? Or we should wait until, like they say in local parlance, yawa gasses?
Yeah, let me borrow your word. You don't need to wait till yawa gas before you do the needful. Like I will always advise, for every interaction, for every engagement that can be termed a contract, you need a lawyer to be by your side when you are doing that. Why do I say this? Let me correct something. There's always this impression of the tenants playing the victim when it comes to the landlord and tenancy agreement. But I will tell you, due to the imbalance in the bargaining power of a landlord and a tenant, the law is more protective to the tenant than the landlord. To be candid, the law is more protective to the tenant than the landlord. You see a litany of things a landlord will have to do before he will just get the property he rented to you in good faith. And tenants, because they've noticed that the law, they have the backing of the law, I must tell you, have been abusing that privilege.
Some?
Yes. Okay, let me say some of the tenants have been abusing that privilege. But it's not a difficult thing. Let me tell you, before a landlord will head to court, your tenancy must have elapsed either by affliction of time or otherwise. So when a landlord, ordinarily, you know your house, your rent is for just a year. By the end of the year, if you don't intend to renew that rent, you should be planning to move out. You don't need anybody to call your attention to that. That's when it also comes to planning that you said earlier. These things are there, so you plan before time. You don't wait until you go to court. And let me tell you, even after the landlord approaches the court, we also know the delays that are sometimes encountered in courts. It maybe take another 6 months before you recover your promises.
It's time for us to go to Kano. Now, there's talk about government policies and their impact on rent there. We hear about migration and inflation. Are they working together to impact the cost of rent? Let's take it to Kano.
Like in other Nigerian cities, people troop into Kano for sanctuary and for opportunities. As they come in, they exert a lot of pressure on the economy and on other social amenities that are already limited. Shelter is one of such amenities that is today very hard to come by. For a combination of reasons, such as inflation, which sweeps all aspects of life, rent houses becomes highly exorbitant.
The people used to migrate from Katsina, some part of Katsina, and part of Zamfara state to Kano to look for safer environment. So, and they are looking for accommodation, and any amount you call, they are ready to pay. So this is first factor, that is the highest demand. Then the second factor is the high cost of building materials. Before you see in Kano, people are just constructing houses and letting them out. And based on my experience, when I came to Kano in 2015, I'm looking for 3-bedroom flats. I think I was shown different categories of houses, like up to 10 for me to choose. But nowadays, it's even difficult to get one. So people stop construction because of a high cost of building materials.
There are also attitudes of some estate agents which compound the situation.
The third factor is attributed to greed in the real estate market. So greediness from the landlords or the property owners or the property agents. So whenever they want, they will just increase the rent anytime they want it.
Sometimes the problem is from us, the estate agents. We may be giving house apartment rents, let's say 200,000 naira, but we increase our own 50,000 naira, for example, without the consent of the house owner. The next time the tenant is to pay, he will pay 250,000 naira.
Expert believes that in Kano City there are no functional government policies regulating the activities of rent.
Especially here in Kano, I'm in Kano since 2015. But based on my own experience, I have never heard of any law by the state government to control rent price. Especially in Lagos, they have a law to control, and the government fix rent price according to different location in the city. And there is a law that says that a landlord cannot increase that fixed amount by the government. And then it has to be, there is going to be an upward review ever after 3 years.
Sometimes back, government alone or on private partnership arrangement built houses and sell to civil servants on owner-occupier basis. Through such arrangement, a lot of people were able to own their own houses, apartments. But today, even when such exist, common man who already struggled to survive could not afford them.
And I think we have a housing deficit of more than 2 million housing deficit in Nigeria. And as far as government cannot come in the near future, I didn't see any possible solution. Because government have to come in and provide affordable housing for people. For example, I think some previous government in Kano decided to construct some houses for sale, but the houses are not affordable. And most of them, they were abandoned, especially if you are going along Kano Zaria Road. You will see many houses that are from Kosia, Amana, and the rest. They are there, they were constructed more than 10 years ago, but a common man cannot afford even to buy or even to rent.
Indeed, the government has a role to play, but a whole lot rests on the shoulders of the landlords. Now, we hear stories of some landlords not giving their houses to some certain people, some certain gender. Some will tell you, I don't want a single mother in my house. Some will say, I don't want the people from this particular extraction to live in my house. Are these things real? NTA Enugu will delve deeper. Let's watch and talk.
I'm there already. Okay, thank you. Sir, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What can I do for you?
Sir, please, I'm looking for an apartment. They said there is a vacancy here. So, I don't know if you can give me the house.
You don't have any problem. I have one here, and I know that you'll be happy when you see it. Eh?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I hope all your family, they are all here.
No, sir. I'm a single mother.
Just forget about it.
This is the harsh reality that unfolds in the hearts of Nigerians' urban landscapes. The discrimination in the rentage of houses to certain categories of prospective tenants, like property owners and landlords, is a bit worrisome.
You go to section 42 of 1999 Constitution as amended, you are not supposed to discriminate against anybody on any ground whatsoever, based on religion, sex, tribe, and even marital status. What you should be after is, can this person pay the rent? Is this person going to be a good tenant? And that is it. Is he going to put my house in a tenantable position when he's leaving the house? And of course, that is the essence of tenancy agreement.
An estate agent, Michael Abuja, who has been in this business for over a decade now, shed more light on his experiences.
Greed in real estate, developers and the so-called landlords. Some of them believe that their house is their asset. As you go to office in the morning, they sit at home or anything depends on that house. Once they hear little increment in your fuel or any little thing in the market, price of commodities goes high, they will do what? They will increase their own. If you talk, they say, are you not in the market? But that is just because government are not checkmating it. Because if they have a standard and active law guiding housing, such will not happen.
Dismantling these barriers requires strict advocacy for fair housing laws and education on anti-discrimination policies.
Violence against persons prohibition law. That law protects everyone. Violence against persons. So everybody is entitled to peaceful coexistence. When you begin to discriminate against someone, it's violence against that person, and it's captured in that law.
Some of them are making it mandatory that before you pay for a house, you will have a senior servant. Maybe senior servant is not a level 7 or level 8 officer. It's a senior servant from level 12 up. The person will shorty and sign that if in the next month the tenant owe or failed to renew the rent when due, that the shorty will be held responsible.
The need for a change is evident. The government needs to address housing discrimination in Nigeria.
In any state you find yourself where you are being discriminated against, you can come under VAP law, you can come under the Constitution and seek redress.
Breaking free from the chains that bind us to perpetual housing discrimination.
When we were talking, while those features were rolling, we got to learn that some landlords and landladies, because of what they've experienced, they now put a blanket identification for every single mother or anybody from that ethnic area or anybody that has that profession. And we're coming to learn that that may not be the case. Dr. Ibukun, you can imagine how painful it is for someone, a young girl or a young man, you know, you want to get a place, you've managed to save up, you have what it takes to pay for it, and the landlord or landlady says no. We've also learned from Kano that the inflation and the cost of building materials is affecting the cost of accommodation. Should that so impact those who are coming to pay for these houses? Because the inflation, there's no corresponding inflation in our table.
Okay, awesome. So the first, discrimination, it's a no-no.
Yeah.
You should not put a blanket on everyone because you've had a bad experience with just one person.
Yeah.
What I say is that it's important that when somebody says, I want to rent your house, find out where's she working, what does she do, her previous, so I even say you can actually ask the previous landlord what was your experience with this person, because Mr. A doing something wrong does not necessarily mean Mr. B should do something wrong. So there needs to be a lot of advocacy in that place. Barrister, you know, I mean, people in your sector can really help us to do a lot of advocacy. Landlords should be able to do checks. Then agents should also be able to say, I'm bringing this person to you. She's a single mother, but she works here. She's done this. She's done that. So it's a KYC thing. Right, so that there are no blankets. I absolutely do not believe that we should still be in ethnic issues. I mean, that's a no-no. That's something that it's not just in the housing sector, but across so many spaces. We're still in this ethnicity thing, and that should be totally. I believe that people should even seek legal regress if somebody ever says to you, because you're from here, I'm not giving you my house to rent. Yeah. So that said. The funny issue around increase in building costs. So whenever anybody is investing in real estate, that is, I'm going to be building a house and I want to put it up for rent. The man that is building the house looks at how much he's going to build and says, how much do I expect to earn from this? Unfortunately, we're in a high inflationary environment. It means that no matter, as long as building costs increase, rents would also increase. Now, you said something that was said, income does not increase as fast as inflation, you know. Again, that's a challenge.
It's a challenge.
It's a big challenge. I would also say an appeal also needs to go to landlords to say sometimes you also need to consider. So if I build my house now, I probably have built a lot more expensive than a man who built 10 years ago. So I say even if you're building and you feel that you're built with quite expensive, it's important to also look at what's going on around and see similar houses in these spaces, how much are they going out for as rent? You know, and then a few things in terms of, so if instead of using marble, you want to use regular tiles.
Yeah,
you
finishing.
know? So you want to look, if you're going to rent it out, you want to also say, oh, what types of finishes help me to attract rent. That will not necessarily kill the tenants in this space, right? So those are things that we can look at to make it easier for the people.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
Okay. Okay, so so many questions here. I'm going to start with this because this one is, he said, my question is that I stayed in a rented house for 20 years. When the landlord was selling the house, he didn't inform me as his tenant, and I want to approach the court to challenge the sale. I need advice, barrister. This was just for you. Somebody just sent in 20 years of living in a house. I mean, he's a stakeholder, if you ask me.
Wow.
So, I mean, what should he do?
One will even say, how can you be in a rented house for
20 years?
Who are we to speak?
Who are we anyway?
Yeah,
so let's
first of all, I must commend him that he's a good tenant to have lived in a house for 20
years.
That means he must have been consistent in payment of his rent and must have been of good behavior for the landlord not to have sent him out. But now, that comes to what I said earlier, that when it comes to landlord-tenant matter, this is simple contract. And what guide is offer, acceptance, and other terms related to that. That you've lived in a house for 20 years. Now, let's take sentiment out of it. The landlord does not owe you any right, what we call right of first refusal. He's bringing moral into it. The landlord has a right to sell his house to whoever he wants to sell. All he needs to do is that, okay, I will give you proper notice that at the end of this year, this house will not be available again for rent. Once he does that, there is no right you have to challenge a landlord who maybe has a buyer that is buying his house maybe with 50% over what the property worth is to come and sell it to you that will price it down. No. But like I said earlier, if in your agreement, because most of these long, I call it lease, most of the lease agreements will contain a right of first refusal.
Yes.
So if that is in your agreement, then you can challenge it. Because in the agreement you signed with him, there is a right that he will offer this property to you first if he wants to sell, before he will sell to an outsider. If that is contained in the agreement, then he has a right to, in fact, that sales will be declared null and void by the courts.
Okay, so what ought he to do now? Go to court?
If there is,
okay, if there is.
That's how will I put it?
Clause.
Yes, in his agreement. He can go to court. Okay. He will set aside that.
But if he doesn't want to buy the house,
if
he felt it was wrong and negligent of the owner not to inform him, because he said, I was not informed.
No, there is no how they will sell a house
without telling
you.
It happened.
Because now, for him to have lived in that house for 20 years, I will assume he's a periodic tenant, which after 1 year, upon payment of rent, automatically your rent starts reading again. Yeah. So for you to have sold that house, you must have informed him, giving him about 6 months notice first to say, oh, at the last of this, your rent for this year, please, you will not be renewing because I'm selling my house.
Okay. Okay, please, just to add to that, a landlord is asking from Ilorin, Olare Waju. He said, how many months can you give a tenant who refused to obey his tenant? It's landlord, a tenant who has refused to obey. That's what I'm sure.
How many months, like notice?
Yes, can you give, because I'm sure the tenant is not paying. So how many months should he give? It's a landlord.
Yeah, this is another misconception I will always tell people. Upon the expiration of your rent, what you are entitled to is just 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover possession.
7 days?
7 days.
As far as your rent has expired. Now, if you're a periodic tenant, that, like I said earlier, that will roll over automatically, 6 months to the end of your tenancy agreement, you're given a quick notice informing you that at the end of your tenancy agreement, I'll be taking back my property. But if you're a tenant for a fixed term, let's say your tenancy agreement have something like for a fixed term setting, 1 year, 2 years, you know that your tenancy will not exceed that term setting. So all the landlord needs to give to you upon the expiration of that term is just 7 days owner's intention to recover possession, after which he now proceeds to the court. Like I said earlier, that's why when tenants are playing the victim, I don't really like it when they're playing the victim, because the law is so protective in favor of the tenants against the landlords.
But some tenants,
some wouldn't want to hear this though.
That 7
but that's
days,
the truth.
No, but 7 days in favor of the tenant. How is that favorable? Can you find a house in some cities in 7 days?
7 days.
And what? And of those 7 days, 5 working days. Kids are going to school. You are going to work.
Sorry, that's why I said it has to do with your agreement.
Okay.
For every tenancy agreement, be sure you collect your tenancy agreement.
Okay.
And once it is written, let's say for a fixed term, you're renting a house today, it will be expiring next year, same day, eve of this day, the anniversary, yes. So if it will be expiring on that day, you have the whole year to plan to get another house. If it's for a fixed term setting of 2 years, you have 2 years to plan to get another house.
Okay,
so they're not taken by surprise, not at all.
Our understanding now is that Dr. Buku, maybe you can come in here, is that from the day you pack into an apartment, start to plan.
That's it.
So you have the pros and the cons. You start watching. In the 8-9 month, have a plan B, just in case.
Yes.
Is that what Marcelona is telling us?
So he's saying that if what you have signed up to is a fixed term, that is, your agreement reads, it's a fixed term, which means that the landlord has no obligation to allow you renew your rent. Then you need to prepare. But if it's a renewable one, periodic tenancy, you can then assume that you can renew your rent. However, when your rent, well, I also say again, what you should do is to, before the expiry date of your rent, so a day to 2 days to 1 month to reach out to the landlord, renew your rent actually, because once he takes your renewal, then you have legally been bound into the next year. Right?
We're going to the streets now. Last week, we talked here on Weekend Deal about abandoned children and their place in society. And we've come to learn now that with this increment, arbitrary, or let me correct myself, accelerated, continuous increase, it's not just the children now who are vulnerable. Sometimes entire families become vulnerable. They can no longer afford to stay where they were staying before, and there's nothing to even put together to get another place. These people are out there on our streets. Well, Edwin takes a look at the lifestyle.
Shelter provides privacy and safety from human and animal enemies. It also protects belongings such as clothes, domestic animals, food supplies. All these are kept in the shelter of the owners.
Due to arbitrary increase of house rent that puts strains on economic activities, family savings, there was an instance when I got notice of an increment of my house rent, which put pressure on the payment of school fees and all other domestic, engagement, that we had to find a way to streamline the feeding of the family and all associated economic activity. So, to a large extent, arbitrary increment of house rent, it's a big challenge, especially in this present day Nigeria.
Is it true that some tenants have been affected economically and personally due to the indiscriminate increase of rent in Nigeria? Greed can be a cause of an increase of house rent in several ways. One way is that landlords or property owners may be motivated by greed to charge higher rent price than what is considered fair or reasonable. They may try to maximize their profits by charging the highest possible rent, regardless of the cost of living or the renter's ability to afford it.
We have been paying house rent before because the landlord has increased the money for us. That's why we choose to stay in uncompleted building, because we don't have the money to pay for the house rent. That's why. And secondly, my husband is working in the estate. That's why we say let us manage ourselves. in the uncompleted building because we don't have money to spare to pay for the house rent and money for school fees for our children. Everything, our hand did not reach. That's why we are staying for uncompleted building.
This can lead to renters being priced out of the housing market or being forced to spend their income on rent. Let's hear from people on the streets.
This house increasements, in fact, it's very, very touch me. Me personally, it touch me because right now I'm sleeping inside motor. I can't afford to pay house rent. Even my family is they are in a village, so I manage myself sleeping inside motor because of house increasement.
Landlords out there, be moderate with your house rent.
That's a good one. I'm going to re-echo that one. Landlords out there, be moderate with your rent. Okay, so I'm going to, the messages are coming in. Thank you. Oh, thank you for joining us. And this one is from Enugu. She said something. In Enugu, getting a rented apartment is now almost impossible because of landlords and agents. I was going to go to agents before this one. An agent can bill you almost 200K for getting an apartment for you. In some cases, the landlord will serve as agents, okay, and collect the money, including his rent fee. It's really terrible here in Enugu. I am sad. Okay, Dr. Ibukun. Agents, are they a blessing or a curse?
Okay, they're a blessing on one hand, but because they're in the space in which they operate is largely unregulated, you find that they go over, I feel that they go overboard in terms of their fees and charges, which then further puts the pain on the renter. We need to move more towards regulation. Right, we need to have that space quite controlled because many times people are renting and they need to pay sometimes up to 20% of the cost of the rent. Yeah, and then sometimes truly the landlords themselves are the agents and they still charge these fees.
So they get double.
Yeah, but they get double. But the thing is that where there's no law, there's no saying. So it's difficult to put the hammer. And what makes it also more difficult is because you don't want it, somebody is already waiting to pick that house out of
They will even pay for 2 years.
They would even pay for 2 years, you know. And then there's also instances that we found. The landlord says, oh, I want to give my house out at 2 million. But because the agent wants a lot more fees, he then says, oh, this house is good for 2.5 million, and puts it out on the market, and they're the breach to the market. The other thing I've found is that the landlord is saying, I'm okay with a one year rent. And then, which is really not right, the agent goes into the market and says it's 2 years because it knows its fees. There needs to be a lot of regulation in that space, right?
Okay, so another one says, it's from Makodi, John Oduma from Makodi says, why blame the landlords for high rents? Government has refused to grant mortgage loans, develop affordable housing schemes. Check out National Housing Fund Office. You will hear lots of grammar. How many people have benefited from their mortgage loans? This is John Oduma from Makodi, our mortgage system. Some people say it's non-existent. Please, what is going on? And end users finance for me is key. You can build all the houses if the end users don't have the capacity to buy. What are we doing with our mortgage system?
Okay, I'm a very big mortgage proponent. I believe that our mortgage system, while we're not there, we're not close to where we need to be, but there's so many handles to actually getting mortgages in Nigeria. In my head, right, I always say to people that there are two major types of mortgages in Nigeria. That is a National Housing Fund mortgage, and which also has a rent-to-own component right now. And then the other bit is your commercial rate mortgages. That is, you go to the bank and take a commercial rate mortgage. This is not a mortgage session, so I'm going to in depth. But you see, many people complain that the National Housing Fund mortgages do not work. But the problem is, do we actually know what to do to access those mortgages? Many people do not know what to do to access the NHF mortgages. So somebody says, if you go to the NHF office to access a federal an NHF mortgage, you do not go to Federal Mortgage Bank. You go to a primary mortgage bank. Right. And then the thing is, more information needs to go out there. So real estate developers need to learn. I say to real estate agents, you yourself need to learn about mortgages so that you can teach people how to access mortgages to buy homes. Then I also believe that the Federal Mortgage Bank needs to do a lot more advocacy. Does the NHF work? many of our properties, we just concluded a project in Lagos last year, and most of the people who bought through the National Housing Fund mortgage. So it does work. But you cannot say something does not work if you have not learned how it's supposed to work. So people need to learn. It works, I have to say.
A lot of people will say that the bureaucratic bottlenecks is what people are running away from. You go there, and you're going to fill forms that are more difficult than jam forms.
I agree.
You're going to tell me where your grandfather, your DNA of it's a whole lot. Can we simplify that process so that people can find it easy to access?
So some people are of the opinion that this is even meant, these are obstacles and roadblocks meant to serve as a deterrent. No, that's not the case.
I completely agree that, see, mortgage documentation anywhere in the world is daunting.
Okay, anywhere in the world, not just here.
The documentation is daunting. The only thing that you can say is a bit peculiar to us is people also are not aware of how to go about the documentation. So we need a set of people who we call mortgage brokers that are specialized in that space, and they exist everywhere in the world. We need them to be able to hold people's hands through the mortgage process. So this is my call to people in the real estate sector.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Because you're a financial expert. I know that's why I was talking about end users finance. We must take proper look at that.
Absolutely.
Let's empower the people to be able to buy. And the tables are flipping here because you said something about landlords also be wary of giving their houses to lawyers. This person said, this is Sonny from Akwa Ibom State. Where I'm staying, the landlord is a lawyer. And he's increasing his rent every 6 months. Where do I run to? He's the law himself and he's increasing.
No, see, there's nothing like one because one is a lawyer. Gone are the days where might is right. No. We have laws now. Whether he's a lawyer, whether he's a even a policeman. Now, first of all, let me also correct this impression. You can't, because it's a constitutional right for someone to rent a house, right to own property and live wherever you want to live in Nigeria. It's also a constitutional right for you not to be discriminated when it comes to rent. You can't come to rent a place, they will say, oh, you're a lawyer, I won't give it to you. You're an Hausa man, I won't give it to you. An Igbo man, I won't give it to you. That's a fundamental, it's a breach of a fundamental right, which you can approach the court for redress.
Dr. Ebukun, your final words.
Okay, so I think very importantly, make sure that you read your rental contract. Ultimately, start having your plan towards owning your home. You do not have to be a home owner occupier. So if you cannot afford to buy a home or build a home where you can live, what you should then do is buy a home where you can afford or build where you can afford, get rents from there, defray part of your own rents. Because what then happens is as rents go up generally, your rents also go up there. You know, and then you can
get something to put towards
and also
your
keep
house.
It real. If you can manage 2 bedrooms, don't go for
Don't go for 5
Please
bedrooms.
keep it real and
you can afford.
This is how we always sign off. Let's hold your hand. The barrister is our friend. The real estate-preneur is also our friend. Let's build Nigeria together. God bless Nigeria. Bye-bye.